The Western Front, late 1944. For 19-year-old Karl Schneider, a veteran of the brutal fighting in the Hurtgen forest, the world was ending. Dazed from a nearby artillery blast, he looked up from his foxhole to see not the familiar gray-green of a German uniform, but the dark olive drab of the Americans. Hands grabbed him, pulling him up from the earth. His war was over. And in that moment, a cold, sickening terror gripped him, a fear far greater than that of any shell or bullet. This was the moment the propaganda had warned him about his entire life. He was now a prisoner of the Amis, the Americans, and he knew what came next. The stories drilled into him by his officers and by the omnipresent voice of Dr. Goebbels on the radio flashed through his mind. Americans were not real soldiers. They were gangsters, criminals, and degenerates scraped from the ghettos of Chicago and New York. They were a mongrel race led by Jewish financiers who took no prisoners. They would torture him for information. They would mutilate his body. They would shoot him in a ditch. He closed his eyes, bracing for the inevitable. But the shot never came. Instead, he was disarmed, searched, and pushed into a long, shuffling line of other captured Germans, a river of gray flowing towards an uncertain fate. This young soldier, a product of the most powerful indoctrination machine in history, was about to be sent on a journey to a place he knew only as a land of subhuman enemies. He was being sent to America. What he would find there would not be the torture and death he expected. It would be something far more powerful, something that would systematically dismantle his entire worldview and the worldview of hundreds of thousands of his comrades. He was about to be defeated not by a tank or a plane, but by a weapon the Third Reich could never have imagined, the simple, overwhelming, and soul-crushing reality of the American supermarket. The Germany that had shaped Karl Schneider's mind was a nation fed on a steady diet of lies about its enemies. For over a decade, Joseph Goebbels' propaganda machine had painted a vivid picture of the United States. It was a decadent, chaotic, and collapsing society, a mongrel nation crippled by racial impurity, ruled by Jewish financiers and teetering on the brink of social implosion. Its people were soft, its industry was inefficient, and its soldiers were poorly trained thugs who lacked the martial spirit of the Aryan warrior. This was not just political rhetoric. For millions of Germans, it was an article of faith, the lens through which they saw the world. This was the myth that filled the minds of the German prisoners as they were herded onto transport ships, their destination now confirmed. The journey across the Atlantic was a period of grim uncertainty. But the first cracks in the propaganda began to appear the moment they arrived. Steaming into ports like Norfolk, Virginia, they were greeted not by a decaying, destitute nation, but by a scene of staggering industrial might. The harbor was packed with an endless forest of cranes, liberty ships, and warships, a testament to a production capacity that was clearly not collapsing. From the ports, they were loaded onto trains for the long journey inland to a network of over 500 POW camps scattered across 46 states, with the largest concentrations in the vast open spaces of Texas, Oklahoma, and the Deep South. For men who had come from a country where every city was a ruin and every resource was rationed for total war, the train ride itself was a profound psychological shock. They stared out the windows for days on end at a landscape that was completely untouched by war. They saw endless fields of corn and cotton, vast herds of cattle, and, most bewilderingly, highways filled with civilian cars driving for no apparent military purpose. They passed through towns and cities with fully lit streets, bustling shops, and well-dressed civilians who seemed completely untroubled by the global conflict. Every mile of track, every undamaged bridge, every passing automobile was a silent, powerful rebuttal to the world of lies they had been told. The America they were seeing was not weak and decadent. It was a continent-sized powerhouse, a nation of unimaginable space, wealth, and power. The journey into the heart of the enemy's land was becoming a journey into a myth, and they were beginning to realize the myth was the one they had left behind. Upon arriving at the camps, the German prisoners were confronted with their first and most visceral shock. Instead of the barbaric concentration camps promised by their propaganda, they found orderly, clean, and well-organized facilities that were run in strict accordance with the Geneva Convention. But it was in the mess hall that the first psychological blow was truly struck. The prisoners, accustomed to years of meager, ironclad rations, were served meals of a quality and quantity that was simply incomprehensible to them. They were given heaping plates of beef and pork, mountains of potatoes, fresh vegetables, and, most shockingly of all, unlimited slices of soft white bread, a luxury that had vanished from Germany years earlier. They were served coffee with real sugar and milk. For men who had been surviving on gritty black bread and thin soup on the Eastern Front, this was not just a meal, it was a revelation. One German POW held in a camp in Mississippi wrote home in disbelief, "We are eating white bread, a food I have not seen since I was a small boy." Another prisoner, a veteran of the Africa Corps, was so overwhelmed by the sight of an unlimited supply of food that he reportedly broke down in tears, stating that he had not seen such abundance in his entire life. This was the first weapon, a war of calories, an assault of overwhelming abundance that began to systematically dismantle their belief in the superiority of their own deprived and starving nation. But the second weapon was even more powerful, more insidious, and it struck directly at the heart of the Nazi worldview. This was the camp canteen, the PX. Prisoners who chose to work on local farms or in other labor programs were paid a small wage of 80 cents per day in scrip, which they could spend at the camp store. And it was here that the ideology of the master race finally collided with the reality of American consumerism. Inside the canteen, the German POWs, men who had been taught that America was a collapsing state, could walk in and buy items of casual luxury that were completely unobtainable in wartime Germany. They could buy Coca-Cola, cartons of Lucky Strike cigarettes, Hershey's chocolate bars, magazines, and even musical instruments. This small act of commerce was a profound psychological shock. It proved that the American economy was not dedicated solely to the war effort. It was a nation so immensely wealthy, so unfathomably productive, that it could fight a two-front global war and still have enough surplus capacity to provide cigarettes and candy to its captured enemies. For the German prisoners, this was not just a convenience. It was a devastating and deeply demoralizing truth. They realized they were not fighting an army. They were fighting a continent-sized economy of such power that it could afford to be generous in a way Germany could not. The camp canteen became a small, potent symbol of an industrial might they could never hope to match. The American supermarket, in its most basic form, had become a more effective weapon of war than any tank or bomber. The psychological assault of American abundance was reinforced by daily life outside the wire. To alleviate the severe wartime labor shortage in the United States, a massive program was established to use German POWs as agricultural laborers. Hundreds of thousands of prisoners were sent out each day to work on farms across the country, from the cotton fields of Texas and Mississippi to the logging camps of the Pacific Northwest. For these men, who had been raised on a steady diet of propaganda about the racial and moral degeneracy of the American people, their interactions with ordinary civilians were a constant source of bewilderment. Instead of the brutal gangsters they had been warned about, they were often met with a surprising degree of fairness and simple human decency. American farmers, desperate for help, were often more concerned with the harvest than with the politics of their new laborers. While fraternization was officially forbidden, small acts of kindness were common. A farmer's wife might offer a prisoner a cold glass of lemonade on a hot day, or a family might share a portion of their lunch. These simple, human interactions directly contradicted the hate-filled caricatures they had been fed. The prisoners saw a society that was confident, well-fed, and, most confusingly, not consumed by the same fanatical hatred that had been the bedrock of their own indoctrination. This combination of overwhelming prosperity and decent treatment created a profound cognitive dissonance in the minds of the prisoners. Their entire worldview, a belief system built on the twin pillars of German superiority and the weakness of their enemies, was systematically collapsing under the weight of undeniable daily evidence. They saw with their own eyes that the America they had been taught to despise was a fiction. The real America was a nation of such immense, casual power that it dwarfed anything the Third Reich could ever hope to achieve. "We have been lied to," one prisoner wrote in his secret diary. "Everything they told us is a lie." This was the ideological defeat. It was a realization that went far beyond the outcome of any single battle. They understood that Germany was not just losing a war of soldiers, it was losing a war of systems. The Nazi system, built on conquest and plunder, had resulted in a starving, exhausted homeland. The American system, built on a continent-sized economy of free enterprise and industrial might, had produced a level of abundance that was almost obscene. The prisoners realized that they were not fighting against an army. They were fighting against the full, unrestrained power of an entire continent, and the outcome of such a contest was never in doubt. For these men, the war was already over, not because they had been defeated in battle, but because they had seen the truth with their own eyes in a Texas cotton field. In 1946, with the war over, the process of repatriation began. The hundreds of thousands of German prisoners of war were put back on ships and sent home. But they were not returning to the world they had left. The Germany they returned to was a nightmare, a landscape of apocalyptic ruin that was far worse than anything their American captors had described. Their homes were gone, their cities were vast, silent cemeteries of rubble, and their families were scattered or dead. The nation that had once boasted of its superiority was now a starving, broken land, completely defeated and occupied by its former enemies. For the returning POWs, the contrast between the vibrant, prosperous America they had just left and the apocalyptic ruins of their homeland was the final, crushing verdict in their ideological defeat. It was the undeniable physical proof of the ideological defeat they had already suffered in their minds. They had seen firsthand the source of the power that had destroyed their world, an industrial and agricultural might so vast it was almost beyond comprehension. They now returned to the consequence. And in the years that followed, a remarkable epilogue to this story unfolded. As West Germany began its slow, painful process of rebuilding, thousands of former German prisoners of war, men who had seen the truth with their own eyes in the camps of Texas, Mississippi, and Arizona, made an extraordinary choice. They began to legally apply to immigrate back to the United States. They had been captured as enemies, but they chose to return as citizens. A final, powerful testament to the profound psychological impact of their time as prisoners. They had been sent to America in chains, but in a strange and powerful way, the experience had liberated them from the world of lies that had led them to war. They had been defeated, not by bullets or bombs, but by the simple, undeniable, and overwhelming truth they had found in the land of their enemy.